Dr. Chuck Welch, president of the Arkansas State University system, has been dealing with COVID-19 and its impact on all of the campuses in his system. Where is higher education headed next? I caught up with him to find out.
I don't have to tell you that COVID-19 has wreaked some havoc on higher education. You were certainly familiar with all that, disruptive to students, to faculty, to the finances of the institutions as a whole. Put some of this disruption in perspective for me in terms of how you guys have coped with it and just really how across all facets has it been?
Well, first of all, Roby, I think that, I want to say something about what our faculty and staff and students have been able to do. I mean, having to adjust in the middle of a semester, go to fully online, relocate thousands of students who were living on campus, some faculty who had never taught online, having to try to find a way to make the curriculum work. They have all been incredibly responsive, and I'm just so appreciative of the hard work that they've done, but it has certainly been a challenge. I can tell you that one of the interesting aspects of all of this has been, there's always those who question, do we even need brick and mortar campuses anymore, or should we go to fully online? I can tell you what we're hearing from our students is they want to be back. They really miss that one-on-one attention, that social aspect of a higher education. And I can tell you some of our faculty want to be back. So I think that it's reinforced for all of us that the face-to-face on-campus component of what we do is critically important. But I told someone the other day, I said, I think the thing that really has been most eye-opening for me about this is we have so many different aspects of our campuses that for years have just operated like clockwork, have required almost no consideration or adjustment. And now we're having to rethink literally every single thing we do, down to where a desk sits in a classroom if we come back. And so it's been an exhausting period. We've spent a lot of work rethinking our processes and our policies and how we adjust to those and making sure that we're providing our faculty and staff and students what they need. We know that this is going to be the new normal for some time into the future, and we've got to be able to adjust to that. And we've also got to be able to make adjustments and be flexible on a minute's notice. So there's really no aspect of the institutions that hasn't been touched by this. And we know that we're just barely scratching the surface in the things that we're going to have to do.
Yeah, I want to run through some of the litany of some of those things that you brought up there individually, but let's start first with finances. How has this affected the finances of the system and the universities that are part of your system? Kind of give me an overview of what it's done financially to you guys.
Sure. Well, there's multiple angles to look at. I mean, obviously, you look at state revenues first, and we experienced a cut this year for fiscal 2020 that was a result of both lost revenues from the pandemic as well as the extension of the state income tax payment, which will move over into another fiscal year. So our campuses had to make immediate adjustments, even between now and June 30th, for what this year's budget looks like. And then, of course, those cuts carry over to next year. When you start looking at FY 2021, most of our campuses are experiencing at least a 10% cut in our normal state revenue. So that makes a big change right out of the gate. Second, for our campuses that were residential, we had to look at providing housing and food service refunds to students who were not allowed to remain on campus. Obviously, that comes out of institutional coffers as well. From an athletics standpoint, you begin to think about lost revenues there. Now, the upside is you have some expenses that we didn't have to incur, but the longer that goes forward, the more concerning that becomes. We did get some assistance from the federal government, but unlike what many people think, it was not a cure-all. The amount of money that we received, at least 50% of which had to be given directly to students in the form of grants. And then the other 50%, there are so many different limitations, at least right now, on how those funds can be spent. They don't even begin to cover what we lost from the state government. And so there's just a lot of moving parts. Our system made a commitment to not raise student tuition and fees this fall. And so there's not any additional revenue coming in there. We don't know what enrollment's going to look like in this new era. So it's been a very interesting budgeting process. I will say that the state's been very good to listen to our needs and try to identify ways that can be helpful. But we certainly know, like really every facet of the economy, we're being directly impacted by this.
So how are you budgeting? I guess just to stay on this financial argument here, you must have multiple scenarios that you're looking at. This is what happens if everything returns to normal. This is what happens if we have to do everything online. This is what happens if we're some hybrid in between, or this is what happens if we don't get to do college football per se, but we can do some other things. Walk me through not the details of those scenarios, but just how many different scenarios are there?
A lot. And I will tell you, one of the things that I said to the campuses is we need to have multiple contingency plans in place, multiple scenarios, fully understanding that it'll be a lot of work that may never, ever materialize or be utilized. And that's okay, but I would rather have those contingency plans in place rather than just, have an aha moment or an uh-oh moment and have to make a quick adjustment. We're being very conservative. We're certainly not budgeting. In fact, we're not even budgeting 100% of the state funds that are currently forecasted for our campuses, simply because we want to have a little bit of flexibility there in case there are additional cuts. We don't know what the coming months are going to look like. We're not allowing our campuses to budget last year's enrollment numbers for purposes of trying to determine revenue. We're actually doing about 95%. Some campuses will be a little bit more conservative of last year's enrollment. So if there is an enrollment decline, you've got a little bit of built-in care there. Obviously, we're trying to do everything we can to protect our employees. We're trying to do everything we can to protect our students. But we certainly have models for if the campuses are open in the fall, which we announced this week. That's our intention. We also have models in case we're not open this fall and what that looks like, models for whether there is athletic competition in the fall, models for whether we have students living in the residence halls or not living in the residence halls, whether we have food service or don't have food service. I mean, there's so many different components, but we're putting them together. And, I hope that we only have to use one of those plans, but we'll have multiple ready just in case.
I want you to wear your hat as head of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, a national organization. You can answer this question in that with that hat on or with your ASU hat on. There are a lot of institutions of higher education that are struggling financially before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I have talked to some of them in Arkansas, and I know there are some nationally. Are we going to see fewer universities and colleges as a result of this, no matter what we kind of come up with as a solution and no matter what scenarios play out?
I think that's inevitable, Roby. And I mean, there have already been some announcements nationally about institutions that are planning to either close their doors or merge with another institution or things of that nature. It's one of those situations that will depend on each state scenario and what that looks like. Obviously, as you said, there's some institutions that are already hanging by a thread. I can tell you we are having at least weekly, if not more frequent, conversations of ASCU, that's the acronym for the association, talking with our counterparts. And one of my counterparts yesterday from a Western state literally said, right now, our greatest concern is will we be able to keep our doors open? So I think you're going to continue to see that to happen. And I'm not sure, short of just massive influx of dollars from either state or federal coffers, that's going to be able to be avoided. And, fortunately, in our system, our current campuses had built up an appropriate amount of days cash on hand and things to try to deal with these types of crises that might happen. But Arkansas, while we haven't seen significant amounts of new money, with the exception of the last couple of years and Governor Hutchinson's commitment, we haven't experienced the massive cuts like a lot of other states have. And so when you combine that with this situation, it's going to make it very difficult for institutions, both public and private, 2-year and 4-year, to exist in this new normal.
Obviously, this is going to be a paradigm shift for higher education. I know I've talked with some folks in the healthcare profession, and one of the things they've told me is telemedicine is here to stay, for instance. We're not going to see things walk back from where we have moved forward in that realm. What's going to not change in the realm of higher education? What do you think is something that's going to come out of this pandemic that will be permanent, I guess is the right way to ask that?
I think that's a great question. And I think, Roby, it's probably that there will always be a mix of distance education and face-to-face instruction. I've said there's been a lot of folks that have suggested to us that, do we even need brick and mortar any longer? Or can we go fully online? And while it's been a great benefit, while it's been something that's allowed us to adapt and adjust very quickly, we're also hearing overwhelmingly from students that they want to come back. They want that social interaction. They want that face-to-face instruction. So while that may even look different, while they may be meeting, at least in the short term, in conference rooms and with desks, spaced 6 feet apart and things of that nature, I think that one thing that's not going to change is we're going to always have those brick and mortar physical campuses along with that supplementary online education. So I think it's really reinforced to us that strong value of the face-to-face instruction and something that will be able to weather any types of crises like this.
When homemade is too good to keep at home. Helping Arkansas business do business. Making better happen with First Security.
You'll find us at the end of a lot of long country roads, covering over 60% of the great state of Arkansas. Our 17 electric distribution cooperatives are working day and night to provide reliable, affordable power to over 500,000 homes, farms, and businesses, just like yours. The Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas, your local energy partners.